I recently just finished 1000xResist, and honestly, as someone who mainly plays video games just for like the gameplay perspective, it really changed my perspective on narrative games for the better. And I really couldn't recommend this more to anyone who wants to really get into those story-focused games. And kind of wanted to talk about my experience. Why did I pick up the game, and what the game does really well, for me to kind of convey the point of how great this game actually is at getting you really hooked into the story, where it says in other narrative games, especially like for example, those old school ones were not really old school, like 20 years ago, maybe like Uncharted games, where it's very much choreographed what you're doing. And I feel like that kind of really takes away from the whole intention of video games, where it's all about interacting with the environment and turns it into something of more of a movie sequence, which really removes the point of video games entirely, basically. And for me personally, the best way I really love the narrative and storytelling is when games do storytelling through the environment in a very much a show, not tell kind of style. This is reflecting in some of my favorite games like Hollow Knight and Hyper Life Drifter. Like, sure, those games both have great combat and great gameplay loops as a whole, but it's also the fact that the story is told in a way that it feels like me as a player, I'm interacting with the world, and at the same time, I'm also learning about the world, and it's not being force fed to me in some choreographed way, is what really pushed me to finish those games at the end, and also the fact that it aligns to the very core of video games where it's all about interaction, right? I recently just talked about Octopath Traveler 2, and one of my problems there was the dialogue fatigue. And after finishing that, I went to 1000xResist and I was scared because 1000xResist is literally just talking to people, basically. That's the whole game. But I was terrified of this because by the end of Octopath, I was just skipping through everything. But with 1000xResist, I was actually invested. And there is voice acting in 1000xResist, but I was heavily invested in the story. And I actually didn't skip any voice acting, any nothing. I was just going through the game, enjoying, and really trying to understand the world. I want to really just touch on quickly the delivery of the voice actors. All great in English. It really felt emotional to me. And even though there's a lack of facial animations for most of the game, I think it really adds to the kind of uncanniness of the game as a whole. And I kind of wanted to talk. That was one of the main reasons I actually kind of picked up the game, was the fact that the art style was just so uncanny. And so I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna pick this up. And I think the facial animations really add to that, in that sense of like, it's almost a little bit teaming towards like a horror thriller style, but at the same time, it's still maintaining those like core story elements that keep it grounded. And another reason I kind of picked up the game initially was also because people were saying it had a similar story and vibe to Nier Automata. And I loved Nier Automata when I played it the first time around, and again to get all those endings, right? But the thing about Nier is that the gameplay is also really solid there, and there are some moments there that it falters, like the shoot 'em up parts of the Nier Automata. I didn't really like them that much, but here I was looking at the trailer, and it's just these bodies like floating in the sky, for example. I'm just thinking like, what is going on here? I just had to know, even if I was really skeptical of the gameplay loop as a whole, where it's basically just talking to people. But the game does a couple things really well as a narrative experience that really changed my perspective on a whole. And it's also kind of given me like much more interest into trying other narrative games. I think I'm gonna go for maybe try Greece next. It's a like a game you just go, it's very beautiful environments, but I kind of want to learn about the story, even though if it's not so narrative focused. I'm pretty sure Greece is literally just walking most of the game, and I really want to kind of delve into that kind of interactive, that kind of storytelling genre a bit more. I think this game has been like a crazy gateway game, as I saw online the other day, into that. So first, what does the game actually do really well that makes me think that everyone should actually play it, and it's not just like some choreographed story? Well, the main thing is that it gives the player freedom in the experience. It does this idea that I was referencing before about the show not tell, but in a way where for example, in the hub world, in the orchid, you as the player can go talk to any character you want, and every time you complete a new story chapter, those character interactions update. So not only can you just roam around and talk to everyone, every time there's a new chapter, there's new interactions and new things to learn about the world, and it makes you feel like your actions in the chapters have consequences, even if it's just entirely choreographed. Because because at the end of the day, 1000xResist is a very linear narrative game. You do this, and that. There's not much choice in the game. Your actions really don't have consequences, like per se of like picking a specific dialogue option. It's very linear. But just the fact that you see the hub world and the characters changing, it makes a lot already. Furthermore, Furthermore, the fact that it's almost as if you don't, there's no hand holding at all in the game, in the sense that most of the time when I play narrative games, it's like it's very, very, very obvious where you should go. Like especially in Uncharted, you kind of just walk in a straight line. I know I keep referencing Uncharted, but for me, it's kind of like the titular big story game that everyone loves and whatever. But it's very linear, and you know exactly what you have to do. Whereas in 1000 xResist, there's no waypoints, nothing, or minimap telling me where to go. There is an option to toggle it on, but it doesn't really indicate to you where exactly they are. It's just more of like a general idea. And that for me is what really, really got me stuck into the game. Because for me, that is how they mimic this show, not tell way of storytelling, in the sense that you decide what you want to understand about the world. Instead of course, there is the story things and the main story chapters of the game where you are going through and you're hearing exactly what the game wants you to hear. But also, during the stories themselves, there's a bunch of NPCs you can interact with optionally to learn more about the story that you don't have to interact with at all. And especially during the chapters, like this is really well done in the first chapter, where you go and you're going through the school, and it's like you need to go to the gym or you need to go to the cafeteria, but you don't have any idea where the cafeteria is. So you just go explore around the entire school, and that's how you learn more about the world. Instead of me just going in a straight line and turning my brain off to the cafeteria where I can enter my next story cutscene and finish the game and get through the game. The game actually incentivizes you to actively pursue the location of the cafeteria and also actively understand the world around you. And this is really further emphasized by this time mechanic that they injected into what they're called communions, which is like basically you're just going through a memory, and then you could go through a memory at different points in time, but it's the same place. I don't really want to spoil things, but essentially what this does is that you get to really see how the world changes over different points in time, and you also get to see different NPCs and different interactions with them and learn more about how different characters were feeling and overall sentiment of society at the time of different times, even if it's in the same place. And the fact that you get to choose what time you go in, you can just switch freely and explore the entire school, for example, in the first chapter, really goes to show this extra idea of show not tell, because it's no longer that the game is forcing you to do things. Of course, there are things like you have to do this time skip to go to this building, and then you have to go back to go through there. But it's all up to you as the player to decide how you want to interact with the world. Sure, you can just make a beeline for the objective, but the fact that there is no marker to the objective makes it highly impossible. Like, unless you've played the game, basically, it's very difficult for someone to just beeline towards the objective and not interact with the world around it. And this is also emphasized by the fact that, like Hollow Knight, you really don't have any clue what's going on with the world, and the protagonist also doesn't have any clue going on in the world. And I think that's really, really important for immersion. Because, for example, I'm going to keep talking about Octopath because I played that game to death, and I ended up having such mixed feelings about it that I just need to keep coming back to it. But in that game, it's a very established world, and there are people with a very established understanding of the world already. And for me, I kind of felt like I was just playing catch up. Like, I was very much just looking at what the game wanted me to see, in the sense that this is the world that they live in, and now you get to do it. Whereas here in 1000xResist and Hollow Knight and Hyper Light Drifter, you very much don't know, and you and the protagonist don't know, and that kind of puts you on a deeper connection with the character, and also makes you really, really immersed, and gives you a motivation to explore the game. Whereas if you look at a very narrative game where the characters are well established and the world is well established and the protagonist knows the world, it's like, okay, well, this character kind of knows what's going on. Why should I really like? If the character kind of knows, what's the motivation for me as the player to kind of understand? Because it doesn't really help me as a player to keep going through the world if the character knows, and also because if there's a nice little ping on my map telling me exactly where to go. And this is the really main thing about 1000xResist in terms of storytelling that I really, really think stands out. And I really hope other games take inspiration from this in the future, where the game and the narrative experience are intertwined. Because oftentimes when you talk about video games, it's like story and gameplay are very much two separate things. And most people, when they talk about games, are like, the story is great but the gameplay is bad, or whatever. But this is probably one of the first times I've played a video game where the story is really interwoven in the gameplay, in the sense that every single thing you do is pushing forward the narrative, creating a greater understanding of the world somewhat. Everything you do is about the story. And I really think That's very much like the perfect translation of what I would consider a heavy narrative form of media, like a movie, to a video game. Compare this to like a more linear narrative game like Uncharted, for example. I'm gonna keep going to Uncharted, but yes, if you compare it to Uncharted, it's like a translation in the movie in the sense that there are set pieces, right? In that game, there are acts. You're doing this, and then you go do this. You go climb this. You go get in the car here. But it's very much like you're just moving forward in the movie. It's like you're watching a movie, but of many different scenes. But you're not really interacting with the world in front of you. You're just playing through a choreographed movie. Whereas here in 1000 times, just the world really, really unfolds because you, as the player, are discovering the world and you are creating your own version of the story essentially. And this is even like even the fact that you don't really have like a choice in your actions, like at the end of the day, ultimately, like I said before, you don't get to say like you don't have dialogue options that indicate huge story changes in the game. It doesn't need to have that because you create your own story just through the interaction with the environment, which I think is the most important way to show the narrative, and also probably the best way the movies like movie and storytelling as a medium has been translated into video games. When you look at the like history of video games, you look at those big first like JRPGs that try to tell a huge winding story, and you have these very strict like story elements thrown in with the combat, whereas here it's very much like you and the story are one. And I think that's really what set this game apart for me and really like pushed me through it. An important thing to add here is also that the game does not drag. It's like what 10, 12 hours maybe it took me to beat the game, and I felt like I had seen everything. Like I really understood the story. And also, just to make this clear, this game would not do well without the story. I don't want to say anything about the story, but you just need to go in blind, because if you go in with understanding of the story and the environment, then you're not going to enjoy it as much. And I really think going in blind and not knowing anything about the characters as well, because the character writing in this game is just great. Along with the story, every single character is very distinct from one another, and it really goes to show that. And the more you interact with the environment, because there's this basic level of the mandatory interaction, but you can also go on a very deep level and interact and outside of the main chapters and talk to optional NPCs in the hub world and see how the hub world changes as you go through the story. That really, really brings these characters to life, as opposed to just the cutscenes and the narrative and the kind of railroady side of the video game, of railroad side of the game, where you're kind of just playing the game on rails. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the game is just a walking simulator where you just talk to people. And that's what really scared me at the beginning. But ultimately, this was phenomenal. I genuinely think, honestly, anyone who enjoys any form of storytelling, especially if you're more into like thriller, I would say you would really, really enjoy this game. And the game is cheap, and it's from an indie studio. And I really felt also some of the themes present in the game were really hit home to me, in the sense that it didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but I was actually looking at a movie or playing something that actually had a very deep meaning behind it. Because a lot of times with video games, yeah, sure, they can talk about very deep topics and they have deep meaning, but the writing is just not there. But here it felt like the writing was really, really genuine, and that was really, really hit home with me. And the developers who made the game, I don't remember the name right now, and this is very bad of me, but the writers who did this game are just absolutely fantastic job. I'm really, really excited to see where they go next as an indie studio. It's a phenomenal game, and I really think everyone should get this game. And those were my final thoughts, I guess, about 1000 times. I just kind of wanted to hop on, talk a little bit about it, kind of just freeballing. And I just let me know what you guys think of this style. If you think it's horrible, just let me know. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys had a good day, and you better buy 1000 times resist, because support indie devs and the game is wonderful.